This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.
Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, hospitals as an industry can be like emergency rooms, filled with constant activity, continuing diagnoses, and hopes for the best. The Ochsner system announced huge layoffs last week at the same time that it, like other hospitals, faces a nursing shortage. And the LCMC Health system is going to court over regulation issues. In Jefferson Parish, officials face a rare but welcomed issue in trying to decide what to do with surplus money. And in Baton Rouge, the legislature is looking at the status of convictions from non-unanimous juries. Elsewhere, an appeals court panel is looking at an abortion case that will likely go to the Supreme Court. And as complex as New Orleans' water system is, a watchdog group says that its management structure is even more complex and needs to be reworked. Discussing these issues with us are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources; Stephanie Riegel, staff writer, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate; Blake Patterson, staff writer with the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate; and Kevin McGill, staff writer with the Associated Press. And we stay with Kevin right now because in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals here in New Orleans, there were arguments this week regarding the ban on the so-called abortion pill.
Yeah, this is about a drug called mifepristone, which is used, it's widely used in the most common method of abortion now. It's also used to treat women who are suffering miscarriages. We should also note that it remains legal to dispense it now under a Supreme Court order that puts a lot of this on hold until they get the case, probably sometime next year. It was a federal judge in Texas who last month said that mifepristone was wrongly approved for use almost 23 years ago by the Food and Drug Administration. Louisiana's in the spotlight now because it's the Fifth Circuit here in New Orleans that has the case now. And judging from the records of the judges who were hearing the case and the tenor of the questions in this nearly 2-hour hearing, it kind of looks like these judges are teeing it up for a Supreme Court debate on, they seem to be making the case that the Texas judge got it right, and I wouldn't be surprised if they come up with a ruling in the next few weeks or the next few months that either seeks to ban mifepristone totally or at least highly restrict the ways in which it can be distributed.
So if this was from a Texas court ruling, and who filed the suit?
The suit was filed by groups of doctors who are opposed to abortion, and they filed it in Amarillo, Texas, where it was allotted. Well, it wasn't allotted. There's only one U.S. district judge in Amarillo, and he had a long record of being opposed to abortion and opposition to Biden administration initiatives. So it wound up there. He ruled that the 23-year-old approvals, it was in September of 2000, was ill-founded for various reasons that are too deep to get into here. He also said that subsequent approvals of one FDA adjustment made a few years ago lengthened the amount of time mifepristone could be administered from 7 weeks to 10 weeks of gestation. Doctors no longer had to be present to prescribe it. It could be dispensed through the mail. All of these things were struck by the federal judge. One of the keys is going to be, did these doctors have standing to object to FDA approval 23 years instead of the statute of limitations 6 years? One of the arguments is that these subsequent adjustments by the FDA over the last 5-6 years reset the whole clock on the whole thing. So the Fifth Circuit, one Fifth Circuit panel, when they got the emergency request for a stay, said no, they couldn't. It looks like this is time barred. We're not going to rule on that now, but we're going to stay that part of the ruling. But we are going to keep intact the ruling that outlawed mail dispensing You have to go to a doctor now to get it in person, and some other restrictions on its distribution.
So is there an issue or an argument on the issue of the safety of this drug?
Well, that is at the heart of it, because the opponents of the drug and the judge argue that FDA got it wrong. Now, people who back the distribution of mifepristone point to a really great safety record. I think I was looking at one group saying that it's a 99.6% effective in affecting an abortion, and let's see, major complications less than 0.5%. So that's the issue now. Now the proponents of the judge's ruling will say we have anecdotal information and testimony of more frequent complications, and our doctors shouldn't be faced with having to treat people who've been treated with mifepristone. Often that might involve them completing an abortion that the drug failed to complete, and that would be against their conscience. That's one of the issues.
And opponents of the ruling raise the concern about, well, FDA usually does make, approve or disapprove of a drug. Now you're going to have a judge doing it.
Now a single judge, based on testimony that may or may not be accurate, as opposed to an agency with many medical experts and tracking the history of the drug.
Okay. Is it allowable in Louisiana? Can that drug be used here?
Supposedly it could be administered for miscarriage.
Okay.
Abortion, of course, is illegal in Louisiana, so it could not be used for that purpose.
All righty. Thanks a lot, Kevin. Complex issue for sure. All right, Stephanie, over to you. And another health issue in that vein, but about hospitals. Two major hospitals, the two major hospital groups in this area, Ochsner and LCMC. Let's talk Ochsner first. A lot of layoffs recently.
A lot of layoffs. Ochsner announced last week 770 layoffs. That's like 2% of their total workforce. And this will save some $125 to $150 million a year. And this comes after a system that has grown tremendously over the past decade under the former CEO, Warner Thomas, who was making over $9 million a year. They grew to over 40 hospitals across 2 to 3 states, hundreds of clinics. And, this is not to suggest that the chickens are coming home to roost or that they expanded beyond what they could afford, but definitely this represents a real change or shift, a contraction. And this is going on around the country. It's not unique to Ochsner. There have been something like 40 health systems of all sizes, including some of the biggest ones in the country, that have had to lay off people this year. And most of the employees affected at Ochsner are non-clinical, non-patient facing positions. They're back office staff, they're managerial and administrative staff. And a lot of this is because, these are cost pressures that have been building for a long time. Inflation is through the roof. Healthcare costs continue to increase. During the pandemic, as many nurses left the hospitals, they were forced to turn to travel nurses, agency nurses, and those fees are incredible. Drug prices continue to increase. Meanwhile, the Center for Medicaid, or CMS, whatever that stands for, is reimbursing for Medicare and Medicaid at like 1% to 2% a year, which doesn't cover costs. So that's why we're seeing this start to happen.
Is this something that those employees saw coming, or was this really out of the blue?
I think it was really out of the blue, and we have heard anecdotally some, displeasure, as you would expect from people. You've seen scattered social media posts and whatnot. There doesn't seem to be a lot of widespread sentiment that Ochsner was unfair about it or that hasn't lived up to its word about how it said this was going to take place. They said that they were not laying off clinical personnel, although they said there would be some maybe nurses in management positions that they were going to effectively demote. They would lay them off and then come back and offer them a job, maybe at lesser pay, in a patient-facing position. So that was supposed to happen this week, and we're going to follow up next week to see how that played out and what the uptake rate of that was.
I thought it was interesting in your coverage of it, which was very good, by the way, but that Mr. November, the new CEO, explaining it, and he said, look, once this happens, this is it. He told the employees, you don't have to worry about coming to work the next day and hear that the more layoffs coming. This is it.
And we asked him that when we sat down and talked to him, the day that they announced it, and specifically asked him that question, and he gave that assurance. I don't know how you can ever give that assurance, but I'm glad he did, and he unequivocally said that. And then he stated it in his letter to employees. So hopefully they can have some, some peace of mind with that moving forward.
And these layoffs have started already?
The layoffs have started. They went into effect. I mean, it's done. And then they were coming back, as I said, and trying to reorganize and reposition some people.
And so these folks got severance packages?
They got severance, yes, exactly.
And of course the hospital says it's not impacting the level of care for
Well, that's
patients.
what they say. And I don't know how it cannot impact the level of care. I mean, of course, it's very true that there's a lot more health care that's delivered digitally today. And a lot of these positions are office personnel. So, I mean, you might actually have not as many people working at a front desk or able to take your phone call. They have said that won't impact patient care. I think we'll have to wait and see. All
right, LCMC. They, of course, were going to be taking over Tulane.
And they actually have taken over Tulane. They've bought the 3 hospitals that Tulane has operated and used as teaching hospitals, the Tulane Medical Center downtown, and then the 2 other hospitals in the system, the one in Metairie, Lakeview, and then one across the lake, that were owned by HCA. It was a $150 million deal that went through early this year, now being challenged by the FTC on anti-trade grounds, saying that LCMC did not seek federal review before going through with the deal.
But LCMC says they didn't have to.
That's right, because Louisiana state law allows our Attorney General, our Department of Justice, to approve hospital mergers under a law that was passed in the 1990s. Now what the feds are effectively doing is challenging that law. What's really interesting about this is that the deal's already gone forward, right? So you talk about unscrambling the eggs. What's not clear is how much of the actual transition has already taken place. The deal closed in January. Now we're in May. So I think LCMC was just starting to move forward with moving people, with moving furnitures and fixtures and equipment. They had not shut anything down. The FTC, in its lawsuit, has basically told them they can't do anything and has threatened to fine them millions and millions of dollars with the clock running, every day if they don't submit to this review. You've got this battle being fought in 2 separate courts. Our people have filed suit in this federal court in New Orleans. They've filed suit in federal court in D.C. So the first battle is going to be over where this is fought. And then they're going to go on to whether they have to submit to the review. And then if they submit to the review, chances are it's off, and maybe this goes to the Supreme Court. I don't know.
State Attorney General Jeff Landry also joined LCMC in their suit.
Correct.
Against it. So this could go on for a long time, although LCMC is trying to get a speedy resolution.
Right. They've asked for a summary judgment. They want this heard right away so that they don't have to pay the fine, so that they can move forward with the deal. In the meantime, it's not entirely clear on what's going on, how much of a pause this has put on their plans, and they don't really want to talk about it for obvious reasons. They're in the middle of litigation.
But they had to know when they were going through all this that this was going to happen.
Absolutely, absolutely. And they had hired the absolute best attorney in the country to advise them on this, a former FTC regulator. So it was like a calculated risk that they took when they sought the Jeff Landry state approval process over submitting to the federal review, which they probably would not have gotten a favorable ruling on had they sought it, which is why they went this way. They knew that this could potentially be a test case.
And could potentially have national repercussions, too.
Yeah,
other deals around the country.
Healthcare people are watching this.
Okay. All right. Thanks a lot, Stephanie. Blake, over to you. Jefferson Parish Council has some money to give away.
That's right. The in Jefferson Parish, the parish council is where most of the power resides. Cynthia Lee Shang is more of an administrator, but the 7 parish council members control an extraordinary amount of power. They get to choose contracts, but they also have these discretionary funds. Each of their accounts are filled with millions of dollars that they can essentially divvy up however they see fit. So these discretionary accounts have been around for decades, and they're filled through a variety of revenue streams. They get money from hotel motel tax, they get money from video poker revenues, from off-track betting facilities, and that's always been a source of funds for them to sort of, steer towards their favorite pet projects. But in the last decade or so, we've seen these accounts really balloon. And we saw that most recently with how they decided to divvy up their American Rescue Plan Act funds. So Jefferson Parish received $84 million from that federal coronavirus package. And the parish council decided to give each of the 5 district council members $12.5 million and the 2 at-large council members $1 million. And they can spend that essentially however they want through a budgeting sleight of hand that allowed them to sort of avoid the federal reporting requirements.
I like how you quoted one of the council members saying something like, hey, if you all need caps, come and see me. If you all need equipment, come and see me. Well, a rare thing for a politician to be able to do.
Right, and rare to have that amount of money to just sort of essentially shower on your voters. And this all comes as, you know, they're gearing up for what is going to be a pretty contentious election. All 7 of them are running for re-election or for some seat on the council.
So is there a time frame in which this money has to be distributed and or spent? Do you know?
Well, ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act, did have a deadline, but what they did is they, instead of divvying it up to all their council districts, they spent all of it on payroll, and then they took the money that was freed up in their general fund from payroll and distributed it back to their discretionary accounts, which removes all the restrictions on how it, you know, and so
How it could be spent. So is there any accountability then? You know, for somebody who gets this money, do they have to report back to the council? Or to the parish in some sort of way, how it's spent, show receipts, et cetera?
Yeah, there are, for each account, there are different reporting requirements. Some are, you know, grants, some are reimbursements. And so, in fact, the Bureau of Governmental Research, after hearing about this ARPA budgeting sleight of hand that they did, you know, sort of pressed the council to put in some sort of reporting requirement. And so the Inspector General has said that she will, of Jefferson Parish, said she will be tracking that spending. But I'm hoping, you know, for our readers to follow this as, you know, every council meeting to let them know how they're divvying up this money.
That's going to be your job too.
Right.
I mean, you're the guy with the Jefferson Parish beat, you know.
There you go.
Right.
So we can go online and research your article because you have a breakdown of, somewhat of a breakdown, not necessarily for every dollar, but some of the places where the money's going.
That's right.
Find that.
Yeah, and for every council meeting, they amend their budget and they have, you know, all they divvy up the money. So I'm going to be, you know, tracking that as it moves forward.
All right, great. Thanks a lot, Blake. E, over to you. Another complicated issue. New Orleans Storage and Water Board, BGR, had a report saying you need to restructure.
Yeah, I want to do a show and tell. This is a new book that came out that Richard Campanello does so much great stuff about New Orleans infrastructure. It's called Draining New Orleans. It's the whole story about the drainage. You know what happened in New Orleans? He even describes this as the nation's most difficult drainage issue. I mean, not the nation's, the world's.
Wow.
I mean, for a city, you know, if you're Denver, then you can just use gravity, okay? But if you're below sea level, or, you know, it's another issue. And for all the criticism that the drainage system gets in New Orleans, it's also gotten a lot of praise through the years. You know, being able to figure out how to do this, and the story about the The Hague in the Netherlands sent people to study how we did it here. So it's been pretty incredible with the pumping system. You know, people in New Orleans think everybody's got pumping systems, you know, and this is really a New Orleans creation. So it has always been mechanically a challenge, and then on top of that, it's been administratively a challenge. Okay, here's how you do it mechanically, but how do you administer it? And complicating it is that all this was developed around the turn of the century, around 1900, 1899. I think the Sewage and Water Board was established in 1899. And at that time, anytime you establish something governmentally, there was a major factor. There was the control of the state and the control of the city. And the issue between the two was the machines, all right? So a lot of people didn't want the city to have total control of everything because that was usually the machines that were in control. Things like City Park. City Park, you would think, is a city park, wouldn't you? But no, it was created as a state park because of that same rule. And you had a way of developing an independent board. So a lot of things in this area were set up as this combination of state rule for this, a little bit of city rule for this, a little bit of independent rule for this, and kind of like this meshing. So the BGR has recommended we got to straighten all this out now, and we need to have either an independent entity that runs this or a totally city entity, but you can't have it all these ways. And then on top of that, there's differences in how the water's drained. There's one department that the drainage water goes to. There's a sewage and water board that oversees that. So a lot of things need to sit down and start all over and go well, with the caveat that over the years it's done an amazing job, but the time has come to make some kind of change.
Yeah, I read some of the report, and I remember one thing they said was that any way you reorganize it is going to be very complex and going to take years, and it's going to be very daunting and might determine that people don't want to do it. But the only thing worse would be keeping the status quo.
It would be GR did is an established list, I think 53 cities around the country, similar in size and situation to use a comparison with. And New Orleans is just in a class in itself.
Okay, well, it is definitely complex, and like I said, will not be solved soon. I mean, one of the potential suggestions is to fold it into city government. So we'll see what happens with that one.
Not really. That doesn't inspire confidence.
There's not a lot
but
of
thank you.
Rightly or wrongly, there's not a lot of confidence in city government right now.
No.
Okay, well, we'll see where this all goes. Stephanie, over to you, and I'm afraid your segments are cut a little bit because we're running out of time. So quickly on nursing shortage.
Which is like a paradox when you look at what's going on with Ochsner laying off people at the same time that it has more than 800 open nursing positions. LCMC wouldn't tell us how many nursing jobs they have open, but on the internet you can check and see they're advertising for more than 500. And FMOL, based in Baton Rouge, the other large health system in the state, also has 500 or so open positions. So these are huge numbers,
right.
you know, and for LCMC and FMOL, it may even be larger proportionally than Ochsner's shortage because they're smaller, so much smaller than Ochsner. But this has been a problem that has been building for many, many years. The experts have been warning because you've had baby boomer era nurses that have been aging out and retiring in greater numbers than they're being replaced. And the pay has traditionally been still is so much lower than what physicians get paid. And obviously there's a difference in what they do, but the nurses work every bit as hard, if not harder. Their hours are so long, their jobs are so stressful. And then during the pandemic, you had a mass exodus. And as I mentioned earlier, you've had the travel nurses fill in, but they charge a fortune.
Still a real need. So now we do have schools, like a new one just opened right next door to us.
Beautiful
Delgado's
facility.
campus.
You've seen a whole lot of training programs and partnerships that have been created between or among all of the health systems and the universities and the community colleges on these training programs. It's starting to make a difference, and the research shows that, you know, now 3 years post-pandemic, people are starting to return to the profession, but still not enough. And
a very needed profession, but it is
Absolutely.
definitely a stressful one too.
Yes.
So many of the nurses have burned out. Okay, Steph, thanks a lot. All right, Kevin, over to you. Let's wrap up with the non-unanimous juries.
Well, as we know, both by state constitution and then a U.S. Supreme Court ruling, non-unanimous juries can't be used in convicting people in Louisiana anymore. Those were not retroactive to cases where the appeals had not been finished. And there's still hundreds of people, by one count 1,500 people, who are incarcerated based on 10 to 1 or 10 to 2 or 11 to 1 verdicts. At the legislature now, there's an effort to address this by establishing a bill that would establish a 3-judge panel that could decide whether you could apply to them if you are in jail and on a 10 to 2 or 11 to 1 verdict, make the case that there was a miscarriage of justice, and they could conceivably grant parole. The problem here is that a lot of the people who are facing this, the people who support the bill say this may be the only hope of granting freedom or any form of justice to people who were convicted with unjust verdicts. On the other side, there are criminal justice advocates who say it's not enough. These people should get retrials, just like the people whose cases were pending when the verdicts were declared unconstitutional, and they should get a chance at true freedom and true exoneration. Parole is not enough. Bolstering this is the fact that last month, the man whose name is on that Supreme Court case, Evangelisto Ramos, was acquitted of a murder that happened in 2014, I believe. He had been convicted on a 10 to 2 verdict. The Supreme Court said, no, he gets to have a unanimous jury. In April, a unanimous jury acquitted him, and this points to some of the problems with the other cases. It doesn't apply to every case. Some cases, a 10 to 2 verdict would have been 10 votes for manslaughter and 2 holdouts for first-degree murder. So it's not an absolute uniform look at how this could be determined, but at least in these cases where there were 1 or 2 holdouts for exoneration, there's still a lot of debate going on at how to grant justice to these people. Do they get a new trial? Mm-hmm. Would parole be enough?
And so at what stage now are we in the proposed legislation?
The legislation came out of a House committee despite some opposition from criminal justice advocates. It may be on the House floor for a vote as early as Monday afternoon.
And so that you said there were 1,500 individuals that could be impacted by this?
That's the estimate according to the Promise of Justice Initiative, which is advocating for the people who were convicted by what is often called a Jim Crow jury, as we know from the Pulitzer work that the advocate did.
And these were individuals whose cases had really just gone through the process?
Their appeals had been exhausted by the time the Ramos case was decided.
Okay. All righty, guys. Time for other stories. E, let's go over to you.
This weekend, the city is celebrating the 170th anniversary of Gallier Hall, which was the first in City Hall. It's a beautiful building.
It is.
And on Saturday, they're having tours there. In addition to being a governmental place, it was also a ceremonial place, which was important because of Mardi Gras. That was where all the kings were toasted, and when the Grand Duke Alexis came, that's where they saw the parade. When the Duke and Duchess of Windsor came, that's where they saw the parade too. So it's played both roles.
It is a beautiful building, and also a lot of personal events held there, too, over the years as well. Okay, Steph, over to you.
Well, I know y'all have followed the insurance crisis and some of the reporting that we've done recently on what the new FEMA Risk Rating 2.0 is going to mean to neighborhoods around New Orleans. So this weekend, Blake's Jefferson Parish Beat colleague Marie Fazio and I have a report that we did looking at just what those rate increases are doing to the West Bank, the impact that it's already having on residential real estate, what people are faced with, and the effects that they're already feeling. So that'll be in Sunday's paper.
We'll be looking for that. Blake, over to you.
My colleague Drew Broach reported earlier this week a new sports complex construction's getting started soon on the west bank of Jefferson Parish, just across the Huey P. Long Bridge. This is funded through state dollars that was appropriated when John Alario was in the legislature. And the parish is hoping that this will be sort of a sports tourism magnet, sort of attract these Little League teams from across the country.
And it's in that area, the Alario Center, right?
Correct, yes, around the golf course around there.
All right. Kevin, over to you.
Yeah, back to the abortion issue. There's been a package of legislation in Baton Rouge this session that would make some adjustments to the nearly total abortion ban that was passed in light of the reversal of Roe versus Wade. Among them, a bill that would grant exceptions for victims of rape or incest. But pretty much everything has been shut down in committee. The House members, behind the scenes, I think House members just don't want to have to vote on these issues that are controversial.
Okay, so no ban right now. I mean, no exception, rather, on the ban.
Right now.
And we have a total ban. We have one of the most restrictive in the country.
One of the most restrictive in the country, and it doesn't look like that's going to change.
All right, guys. Thanks so much for being here. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.